afternoon. The October 26, 2021 Board Workshop is now in session. Pam, roll call, please.
Mrs. Belford?
Present.
Ms. McDougall?
Present.
Mrs. Jenkins?
Present.
Mr. Susan?
Present.
And Mrs. Campbell?
Present.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This afternoon, we will be presented with an update on curriculum and academic performance and information on attendance boundaries. Assistant Superintendents of Elementary, Secondary Leading and Learning, Ms. Jane Klein and Dr. Stephanie Sullivan will, Elementary and Secondary Leading and Learning. Ms. Jane Klein and Dr. Stephanie Sullivan will provide us the information on curriculum and academic performance.
Thank you, Mrs. Belford, Dr. Mullins, and members of the board. Mrs. Klein and I really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with the board on critical academic achievement issues throughout this workshop. As you all know, we consider data from so many different points. We've previously presented data on student survey results, parent survey, insight survey, bringing together as much information as possible while we work alongside our schools for improvement. Today, we're going to cover 4 major chunks of information. First, some of the day-to-day information that our principals are using to work towards school improvement. We're going to share some information from the state, some of the changes at the state level, and some of the state resources. Mrs. Klein will provide some details about the academic improvement efforts in elementary, and then I will do the same for secondary. We'll pause at each chunk for relevant questions because, as I mentioned in the original sending of the presentation, it is a hearty data presentation. And believe it or not, we did cut it a little to maintain time for robust conversation. First, you're going to just recognize some of these graphics. Just as a reminder to the board and perhaps to our public that may be watching and or participating, we use a data platform called Performance Matters. And this data platform is incredibly powerful and includes a robust dashboard that every time a principal logs in, they're able to monitor key metrics. Every day when I log in, I monitor the district metrics and, of course, Ms. Klein as well with elementary. And so just some basic demographic information from that dashboard. As of October 15th, just over 68,000 students in our schools. I know that's a moving target, but by definition, it's going to be a moving number. And you can see on October 20th, about 51% were male and 48% female. That pattern has been true in Brevard Public Schools for about as long as I've known, so no surprises there. And then you can look at some of the additional attributes of our students. Here you'll see racial and ethnic differences in our kids. And then going on, the dashboard immediately keys an administrator into some of the other demographics. For example, are our students English language learners? And although 4% is a pretty small number, it's a growing number. Many of you guys will know we've had 2% there before, so it is a growing population. We do monitor these trends. You'll see our free and reduced lunch students as of October 20th. We were at 52.28%, and that's fairly consistent with our metrics over the years. And then our ESE students with IEPs, about 17.8%. Again, that's date specific as students enroll in, as students change their status, as students test. One of my favorite screens on the Performance Matter dashboard is our daily attendance tracking. So whenever a principal opens up their Performance Matters or whatever I do, Jane can hear me yelling in the other office as we're monitoring attendance closely. And as you can see, we can see day by day by grade level. October 13th is kind of amusing. You'll see a high absentee rate for 11th graders. That happened to be a day 10th graders were testing PSAT. And so we can imagine what happened there. And you'll see our continued concerns for our primary students. But again, this is a glimpse that a principal can very easily keep an eye on the patterns in their schools. Same with discipline. This dashboard, this part of the opening dashboard updates monthly and along the way. And so this was also screenshotted on October 20th, and you can see our concerns for the middle grades, which is going to tie into some of the work we're going to be doing rather aggressively in the middle grades. Really new to it is ninth grade. That's that third large bluish color bar. And when you think back about what our ninth graders have been through, they had a disrupted seventh grade transition year, a disrupted eighth grade year. So we're really trying to key in on some of the strategies to help in that situation. But again, this is our dashboard that the principals can very quickly keep an eye if patterns seem to change.
As Dr. Sullivan, she didn't, but she typically always, look at your kindergarten today. But I'm going to take you into our current student FSA data, and we're going to begin with some ELA. So this is data points that our principals look at basically at the school level. This, of course, is the district picture. And as we look at this, we analyze where did student achievement fall? And as you can see, middle of the road, we're level 3. We have work to do. And as we look deeper, one of the things that our principals do is they look at the sub-scores. So where in the sub-scores do we have the greatest need? When we look as a district and we look at, for example, integration of knowledge and ideas. So what is that? What do we need to do differently? What do we need to do with instructional material? Is it teacher training that we need? So what is it? So we as the district, we look deeper into this. So we know that integration of knowledge and ideas starts with the third grade FSA on characters. What are characters and how are characters used in a plot? So we have to look deeper. Now we have new instructional material this year, so that adds a layer. And also in elementary, we have our Iready, who has the teacher toolbox, has great information on character development and how to determine character. So all those components, but as a district, we have to look, what are we doing right and what do we need to do more of? So as I said, these are the clusters of 3rd and 10th grade, the standards. Now, we know that these are the standards that were tested for FSA, and as our standards change, then we have to make modifications. The same thing with our math. And you know, that red in functions, well, that's very alarming because we know that functions, sine, cosine, those are critical for knowledge and expansion. But we have to think back of what was missed for our students during this FSA window. Our 3rd graders, they missed a whole lot of background knowledge in math. So, but one of the things that, no excuses, we can't build the skill set at elementary that will cause obstacles in the place of our secondary students. So what are the strategies that we have to put in place to increase these scores? So as a district team, we're looking globally. At the school level, they're looking grade level or school specific. And then as we move through this data, you're going to find more and more information as we go. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Sullivan to talk about it.
Thank you, Mrs. Klein. And just a point of emphasis, these slides that we're looking at now reflect the current children in our enrollment. So the numbers are going to be slightly different than last year's end of the year. We use both sets of data. We use end of the year data to reflect on overall patterns, but this is us using current data to really target strengths and weaknesses. I think we all know math is about schema. It's about building knowledge structures in which you can add complex layers of understanding. And so when we think about a difficult topic like algebra, for some of our students who haven't had that strong schema building, particularly with disrupted learning, you know, we're going to see some challenges there. And so you can take a look at the results that we have. Our students right now that had the skill set last year. Statistics and the numbers system have been our challenging area. We've worked a lot on curriculum development in that area and targeting the sequencing of instruction to better prepare students for success, because Algebra EOC is a high-stakes test. New this year, the students who perhaps did not perform as they would have liked on their Algebra EOC, geometry becomes an opportunity for them. So we'll talk about geometry a little bit more in a second. Grade level of access to algebra is, of course, one of our pillars in our strategic plan. And so we're constantly monitoring that we're doing the right work on when we place students. We've done an 8-year analysis. Without question, the earlier students access algebra, the greater likelihood for their success, and this past year's data has not changed that at all. So what you can see here is the stronger performance by our 8th graders versus 9th graders or 10th graders. Our 7th graders are outliers with extremely high performance, but the subset is really not statistically significant, which is why you see 8, 9, and 10. Moving on to geometry. So in this past year, geometry became a part of the high-stakes testing world. It wasn't in the past. In response to some of the challenges with access to testing with COVID, the state added geometry as a possibility to meet the math high school requirement for testing. Had to choose my words carefully there. And so a student can pass algebra, or they can receive a concordance score in SAT or ACT or PERT. Nope, PERT is gone now, or PSAT, which is kind of interesting. And now geometry is part of that equation as well. So our students that did not perform as well as they'd hope on algebra have an opportunity this year to take the algebra retest, but also geometry. Because it's a different type of thinking, so it's recognizing a different skill set in our students and giving them a different way to demonstrate mastery. Surprising to me, actually, this was a little slightly different pattern than our results in the past, where you see our struggling area was really around geometric measurement and working with equations. Interesting because it's such a sister skill to algebra, but again, this is all from our Performance Matters platforms, gives teachers, principals, and district level staff information at our fingerprint. Ms. Klein, you going to talk about science?
So this slide kind of bothers me because Earth and space, we don't do as well as we should. And here we are on the Space Center. The whole component of where we live and how we work. So we have to look at this and say, what are we needing to do differently in science? Is it more hands-on? Is it more eyes-on? What components of science do we need to increase in the elementary so our students, when they get to middle school, can perform at a better rate, but not just perform, but understanding the nature of science and understanding how everything in science drives our world. So we have work to do in science, but again, these are our current students and where they are. And based on their sub-scores, I want you to look now at our current students by grade level. So they took the test in 5th and 8th, but now we can say that in 6th grade, 21% of our BPS students would score a level 1. So what do we have to do? What strategies, what do we have to put in place so when they take the exam in 8th grade, they're performing at a proficient level? And more than just performing, understanding science and the skills needed to increase in science performing and science understanding. Because we know that science goes hand in hand with math and everything else we're doing. So this gives our district science team of 2 help and guidance in what we need to do and what they need to work on in summer and how they need to change the pacing guides and how we need to provide more hands-on materials into our schools. If you look at the next slide, it breaks it down by sub-score. So like I said, for example, Earth and Space, kind of love that area. Our 6th graders, 30% are what we would consider at the proficient level. But then our 9th graders are 32. So we have room to grow, and we have room to grow in all these areas. Physical science, our current 6th graders, if we continue working with them, they're going to do well by 8th grade. But we can't lose momentum, and we can't lose the structures in place to have our students proficient and understanding and being ready to perform at any college and career. Science is a key, and we need to make certain that we continue to focus on the area of science. And Dr. Sullivan's going to go a little bit deeper now into the area of biology.
So biology is one of our high school EOC courses, and we've actually been doing some piloting on biology in middle school. We've primarily been working with Jefferson Middle School that had a high-quality biology certified teacher. She's experiencing some good results, so we're going to track that for another year to see if exposing those concepts earlier is yielding some positive gains for the students, but more importantly, giving them an exciting science mindset to the possibility of all those additional science courses they could take in high school. Our biology EOC is one of those courses that does have, I'll call them medium stakes. It's not a graduation requirement to pass the biology EOC. However, it is 30% of the student's credit. The biology is one of those courses that is a year-long grade, and it will impact a student's actual grade. So I consider that relatively high stakes. If you take a look, sorry, I'm looking at it as if I moved it along. If you take a look at our results, you can see some, we're looking at 34% in level 3 and then 12 and 16% respectively in level 4 and level 5. And when I look at the strands and benchmarks and the performance of the students in their 5th grade and 8th grade assessment, they tie in really nicely to some of the skills that we want to master in biology. So really working on sequencing that content. As you all know, a couple of years ago, we opened up science opportunities for our students with a change in our science sequencing with some reticence because now we have some students taking biology in 9th grade and others taking it in 10th grade with a few more lingering in 11th. So far, our data is mostly positive, but we are concerned about students taking more advanced science courses after they're required. So we're watching that really closely. We haven't had much data since COVID impacted a lot, so we're looking at students' access to rigorous science courses as an important gateway to college and career. 2 more assessments that are issued in secondary by the state. Civics Eoc is one of them, and we issue that primarily in 7th grade. I say primarily because there's a potential for a student who moved in, didn't have it in 7th grade. We will see some 8th grade results. This is an area where Brevard has always done exceptionally well. We did have a slight decrease in school year 21. Much to our disappointment, not to our surprise though, with the disrupted learning. But overall, you can see really strong measures. You can see nearly a 1/4 of our kids scored at level 5. So this is always has been and continues to be a very strong metric for Brevard Public students. You can take a look at their achievement level by subscore. And again, when we look at by subscore, we're looking at just kind of like bottom, middle, high. It's not a direct number equation, but you can see our results there as well. Finally, the other medium level stakes testing is U.S. history. And in our schools, I would say primarily assessed in 10th grade, but also in 11th grade. Some of our schools follow a model where the students will be taking U.S. history in 11th grade or 10th grade. And this is a pretty comprehensive test. It typically starts with Reconstruction and move forward to contemporary time. So as the time span from Reconstruction gets longer and longer, the content coverage gets longer and longer. So we keep getting more content for a pretty narrow period of time. But again, you can see some really strong results. Social studies has and always has been and continues to be a really strong suit for Brevard Public Schools. You probably recently saw the news on several of our social studies educators receiving state level recognition. So again, you can see the different areas, our strengths. If I were to say a weakness, you can see that global, military, political, and economic challenges. And again, that's part of a compressed curriculum that as more time goes on and more curriculum gets put in place. We have outstanding resources though, and teachers are really committed to that success for our students. And so up to now, we've been focusing on like data at the fingertips of our school. All of those graphs that I showed you, a school level principal can pull it up right on their opening dashboard. So these are all comparisons and data points that we really encourage our schools to look at regularly as they're looking at their school improvement plans. Now we're going to talk about the state a little bit and access for parents and community. So obviously our dashboard has sensitive student information, so it's not open, but the Know Your Schools portal is open to parents and community members. And it is absolutely wonderful. When the state first put this out, I actually emailed Chancellor Oliva and said, thank you so much for this wonderful resource. It allows you to look at everything you ever wanted to know, right down to like staffing ratios, percentages, about our schools individually, the district collectively, and of course the state as a whole. This was formerly, you would hear EdStats or the school report card. They changed the name of it to Know Your Schools, but this screen should look really familiar. And there on the bottom, you can see the website for any of our members that want to go in and check it out.
I'm going to walk you through some statewide comparisons. As you can see, where we were 2 years ago in comparison to where we were last year. We did take a decline, as well as the state did, but we have work to do, and we are doing that work right now. So as we go through this, we're going to be looking at those statewide comparisons, as you can see on EdStats. I'm going to give you a minute to look at these, the demographics. They're quite concerning, and we definitely have work to do because, as you know, we've been working to close these gaps, and unfortunately, Brevard is underperforming the state in African American students, and as we've shared with you before, that is work that Dr. Sullivan and I continue to wonder why and how and what can we do differently. And we have teams working on closing these achievement gaps, as well as both of us are very involved in this work. Our students with disabilities, we did continue to outperform the state and as well with our economically disadvantaged, but it's still not acceptable data. We need to be doing much better. We have about 18% of our students are students with disability. So we have to improve all this work. So again, this is information that you will find if you're looking using EdStats, and you can compare Brevard with the state and comparisons with others. The same thing with math. We are outperforming the state again. We did take a drop again, but math is that area where we know we have their background. There's so much work that needs to be done in the area of math, but we can't just rely on intervention. We have to accelerate and intervene at the same time. And we're going to go deeper into that in a little bit. And then again, Brevard in our African American students, we're right neck and neck with the state, but again, is unacceptable. And you can see where we declined and the state declined. And in our Hispanic, how we declined and the state declined. Our students with disabilities, where we were side by side with the state in 1819, and then we're a little bit above the state, but again, so much work to be done. And then the greatest drop, that again, is our economically disadvantaged. That is a huge drop, and we have to understand why. Why did our students who are economically disadvantaged, was it the gap in learning? Was it the gap in skill set? Was it where we know math is a lot of repetition, and we weren't getting there because of disruptions in learning? So again, this is what we would look at for using EdStats and know your schools. Know your schools. And we continue to analyze this and make decisions based on where we believe in changing our instructional models to meet these needs.
You know, I know our board has been closely monitoring all the data reports and information we've been producing, but this is probably our first time publicly mentioning that unfortunately we realized the decreases in achievement that we had feared, right? Honestly, I'm an optimist. I felt really incredibly good about the unbelievable work our teachers did in a really difficult time. But the impact to the students as a whole, when we throw this data in, along with what we saw on our student survey data in the spring, our students really struggled. They struggled for so many different reasons that we're trying to get to the root cause of all of those issues. But it's concrete now. It's not as arbitrary as we had thought in the past. So in addition to those data points on Know Your Schools, again, lots of other comparisons that can be made. For the purpose of today's discussion, we're going to use some school grade information because it covers a greater variety of impact to the students. And so just as a reminder, we did not do school grades for 2021. However, I'm so appreciative of the state that they produced the data. And so although there's not the sanctions or conditions or rewards of the school grades, we have the information. And whenever there's information, we're going to use it to our advantage to improve student outcomes. And so this first slide is going to show you by our primary demographic groups the total percentage of points earned towards school grade, comparing school year 19 and school year 21. Let you take a look at that for a second. Just for reference, again, we didn't apply the grades to 2021. You'll see the scale to the left on the bottom, just to kind of help you make sense of the information. And we've been working with these comparisons for a few years now. When we move on and look at the actual areas, this is the district as a whole. And for our community, and a reminder to our board, there are 11 total cells that are used when we look at overall school performance. 11 is for our junior seniors, 10 in our high schools, 8 in our middles, and 7 in our elementaries. So it'll make sense as you see it. So side by side, you can look at the different areas between school year 21 and school year 19. One of the areas that I always key in on, of course, are our learning gains and the learning gains of our lowest 25%, because these are the students that we actually hope to accelerate learning beyond a year. And so in sort of layman's terms, learning gains is measured as a minimum of 1 year of growth. This is some kind of funky math, though, because we didn't have tests in school year 20. If you guys remember the board presentation on the prior year kind of voodoo. So there is some funny math at play, but patterns tell us what we need to know on where we need to improve outcomes. And as you can see in social studies, that's where you'll see those modest dips that I mentioned. Really proud of the teachers there. Science middle school acceleration is where the state is measuring the percentage of your students who in 7th grade scored a 3 or higher on math, and then in 8th grade, how they did on algebra. And so for this year, they actually went back to 6th grade as well. And so we knew that would be an awkward data point. It also measures the percentage of students who pass an industry certification. This is going to be a challenging area for us because the state has changed many of the qualifications for the industry certifications our students typically earn in middle school. So we are reconvening on some ways to reinvigorate and refocus our middle school career opportunities. College and career, this is measured by the percentage of your graduating students that graduate with either a passing score on a AP, IB, or ACE test, or a C or higher on a dual enrollment class, or an industry certification, and soon to be, or an ASVAB score for a JRTC pathway. So really excited to see that come in. I do want to mention both middle school acceleration and college and career are lag year data. So the data for 2021 is really on the grads for 2020. And that's why you don't see a big dip yet, because it is lag year data. So next year's data, we expect to see the impact of school year 21. Graduation rate is tricky because of the waiver for students on testing for both school year 20 and school year 21. And so we are tracking, if I took those waivers out, we are actually really close to that 88% from school year 18 that counted in school year 19. So we're certainly pleased to have the higher scores, but we certainly understand where the waivers came into play. So we're also looking at kind of the hardcore truth behind it, if you will. And then again, if you look item by item for our different subgroups, again, we want to see where there is disproportionate impact. And I think everything you've all read, everything in research today is pretty clear about some disproportionate impacts on COVID. And so you can see for our African American students, their patterns of school grade indicators for both 21 and 19. You'll see the same with Hispanic. And then for our white students, how it impacted their achievement in those areas. I'll leave this on for a second because I know there's a lot of data for anybody that might be viewing at home or watches the recording. And then on with our students with disabilities. One of the data points that concerns me the most in all of it is our lowest 25% learning gains with our students with disabilities. That was a really significant drop, and it's certainly something that it's about wherever you start, we make more than a year's worth of growth, and so we want to see those numbers higher in our fragile populations. So we'll be continuing work on that. And then for our economically disadvantaged students. And again, it goes without saying that these cross over groups, of course. I'm going to be turning it over to Ms. Klein that's going to begin first discussing some of the state initiatives regarding school improvement, and then more personally onto our district initiatives in elementary, and then I'll follow with secondary. So this is a good stopping point for you guys if you have any questions on any of the preceding data.
So you guys presented some information that we've kind of seen before when it comes to our African American students performing to their same age peers. So I just have a question because I feel like it's been a while since we were presented this information, but where are we in terms of an equity audit and drafting an equity plan for the district?
So we do have an annual equity report that's a state requirement, and it addresses things like access to and success in rigorous courses. So that process continues. In fact, Dr. McKinnon is beginning that process for this next year. Dr. Mullins would have to speak more directly about an equity audit. I know what we've done is she has gathered information from several vendors and companies and finding the right fit for what we need. So for example, there is a group that another district used, I think at least 2 other districts, but the data they produce, we already have that data. We already know those gaps. So we're trying to find the right fit for what we need and moving forward. So for example, I have lots of achievement and course data, and so it would not be judicious use of funds and resources for that. But we do want more on processes and other things that come into play in working towards equitable outcomes for all of our students. So I'm not the best person to speak to that because I know Dr. McKinnon's been working directly with Dr. Mullins, but what I can say is we have continued to review the possibilities that are out there and finding the right fit for our district. I can produce data all day long. We don't need it for that. So we're trying to find the right fit for areas that we need. We monitor course enrollment. We monitor everything that you can imagine. Obviously, this data presentation is not exhaustive. We measure by pretty much all of our major groups to include students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged, Hispanic, and our African American students, and of course our ELL students, particularly as a growing group. So I can't answer that question, but I can tell you I know a lot of work is going into it.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was accurate or whatever, but no Asian American numbers.
Yeah, we look at the percentages to meet a statistically produced outcome. And so in most of our school spaces, it's not reaching that number. And so we can see that data. They can see the data by student, but it's not producing aggregate data in all the indicators, simply because of the student size. I will mention, though, that our Asian American students are performing very well and are not performing in a disparate outcome, and we can certainly follow up with that data. We'll just have to hand manipulate it a little. The state looks at minimum cell sizes, and so we can produce some additional ones without hesitation. Oh, okay. I guess.
No, we're good.
Yeah, we look at, there's minimal cell sizes for like the validity of it at a district or school level. Each individual student is looked at in a school just for putting up comparisons.
Anybody else? I have a couple, and I'll try to differentiate between secondary and elementary so you guys aren't hopping back and forth. And I think this one probably is best fit for you, Dr. Sullivan. One of the things that you mentioned was that there's overlap between students in our fragile groups, right? So you might have a student who is a student with disabilities as well as English language learner as well as economically disadvantaged. Do we have any indication as to how much overlap we have there and how it might impact our statistics?
No, I don't want to speak off the top of my head because, you know, I like to be super precise with data. It is relatively easy to do, though. As a school, when you're looking at them individually or I'm looking at clusters, you can add all of those factors in. It's something we didn't bring down to the school level here or the individual teacher level. I could certainly play with putting together some numbers on that because I find it interesting. I just want to be exacting and not off the top of my head.
If you want to play with it just
I
for
do.
your own,
I like those kinds of things. So I can put together, you know, our students that are potentially Hispanic plus free and reduced lunch plus students with a disability. We can look at some of those clusters and combinations. I'd be delighted to do that, actually.
Okay,
So.
awesome. I'm just curious to see how much overlap there is there. And then and I think you already addressed this, but so if I'm a teacher in an elementary school, I can log into ProGo and literally see all of that data for my students as well.
So performance matters, not ProGo.
Oh, yes, sorry,
But
thank you.
yes, a teacher will have access by their scope of responsibility. So a classroom teacher will have access to their students and pretty much every possible bit of criteria and information. You're actually going to see an example of one later. The principal, counselors, sometimes our athletic directors, some school-based personnel will have the entire school. We, of course, have the entire district. But everybody's scope, matches their areas of responsibility.
Okay. And then the last question that I have, and this might be better suited for Jane, but you might know the answer as well, Dr. Sullivan, is, so we have, in elementary, we have blocks of time that we have to meet by state requirement, right? So we have an ELA block and we have a math block and we have to have so many minutes on those subjects. Is there a science block requirement?
So thank you for that question. I'm going to let Jane talk about it a little more. We've had extensive conversations around it. One of the things I mentioned before is we're putting together a task force looking at middle school, and in particular 6th grade, and well, 7th and 8th grade as well, but for 6th grade, looking at those time blocks to earn those credit in those classes, and potentially just sort of restructuring how we're organizing that 6th grade experience to make sure students in 6th grade are getting additional content building on what they did in 5th grade for science. And I'll let Ms. Klein take over from there.
Thank you.
Did a beautiful job as always, but no, the main requirement we have is the 90-minute reading block. And I'm so glad you're bringing up that, because we're going to talk in depth about core and what that means in just a minute. But we have 90 minutes of reading, ELA, and 60 minutes of math. So science and social studies are not as scheduled as, they are scheduled, but they're not as required. There are no state requirements around that.
Thank you.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Campbell.
So, so the schools have flexibility according to their school improvement plan. And the reason why I bring that up is I know one of the schools in my area, they were so close to that next level, and their biggest weakness was the science grades. And so they, over the next year, created actually a 90-minute science block most days of the week, and we're able to have significant improvement in that. So there's some flexibility beyond the 90 for ELA and 60 for, I mean, that means shuffling around with their activities and things like that. And I'm sure it was a very tight schedule, but our schools have that flexibility, right?
Right. So the one great thing, and especially with the text that we're using in our ELA block, we can infuse our science and social studies text in there to help bridge that gap and make it a more integrative curriculum. So exciting time. Raise Tears of Support. So I was like, RAISE? What in the world is RAISE? So it is the Reading Achievement Initiative for Scholastic Excellence. So this is brand new to us this year. And so we kept waiting for when are we going to get who's on the lowest 300. And we got some information that we really wouldn't have a lowest 300. We were going to have a new criteria called RAISE. So RAISE is any school that has 50% or lower performance in any cell on ELA in 3rd, 4th, or 5th. However, they have written it into the agreement that when we get the new progress monitoring tool, that they will also include K1 and 2 for any student who isn't on track to perform at grade level. So this was new to us this year, and if you look at the universal, that is for all schools, all state, but there are 1,458 schools identified in the state that have to fall in here. We have 13 of those schools. So they're using the Just Read Florida training, which we always send a team to that training. The district reading plan, the K-12 reading plan, which that is a requirement. We write that every year. We share that. It is evidence-based reading strategies. And then work with the best standards for professional development and ELA support. And then the literacy leadership team and professional development. We've just come off of 2 out of our first 3 PAC meetings, which if you recall, that's our principals, our assistant principals, and our literacy coaches coming together for an in-depth training. So we've completed 2 of those days, and they're about establishing your literacy leadership team. Every school in elementary has to have a literacy leadership team. And that team has to include the principal, the assistant principal, the literacy coach, and then other teacher leaders. Then if you go into targeted, the literacy coach has to have professional development. The unique thing about this for us, I'm very proud of our team of being proactive, is last year the state hired regional literacy trainers. They happened to select 2 of our own people. We worked with them this summer to get a training for our literacy coaches at our priority schools in elementary. The state has now modeled that, and it's a requirement if you're inter-targeted. So we're already ahead of the game because we're already doing that training. So that training consists of, our trainer is Tamara Thatcher, and Tamara was at Endeavor as the literacy coach. And Tamara works and walks through schools with the literacy team. She does targeted PD with these 12 literacy coaches, so to enhance their knowledge and their understanding of how best practices of literacy should be working in our schools. And then our intensive group. That is more direct collaborative planning, and Tamara is connected with each of these, and we have 4 schools on that list. She goes in and actually walks, gives feedback, and provides intervention strategies and acceleration strategies for the school. All of these schools in Brevard had to create a component in their school improvement plan. And that school improvement component had to be strategies around literature, and literacy. So all of those were completed by the 15th of October and were submitted, and we got verification that the state agreed with those new strategies. So that is a new component that had to be turned around like that, but our principals took it and ran with it. So part of this is the coaching cycle, and you can see on the slide how many schools across the state are in each category. The key to all this is it connects to the MTSS process. So I'm going to just move forward into the slide. So for example, let's look at Port Malabar. So it's 50%, right? So look across at Port Malabar. They tested 83 third graders. 49% of those third graders were 3 and above in ELA. If they would have hit 51, they would not be on this list. Because in 4th grade, they tested 84 students, 63% of them were 3 and above. And then in 5th grade, they tested 73 students, and 60% of them were on grade level. So you go back to that 3rd grade at 49, if it were 51, they would not be on the list. So there's several examples of that in this group. I want you to draw your attention to the schools that are bolded. The bolded are on our priority list, and I'm going to go in greater detail about that in a minute. So as our state literacy coach is working with our literacy coaches, they're looking at quality instructional material. They're looking at the MTSS process. They're looking at evidence-based reading strategies so that all students can be proficient in literacy. So this is new. It appears to be here to stay, but it's not. It's actually good work because it's increasing that importance in literacy, and we all know that that is key. If our students are reading more, they're going to know more, they're going to perform at a greater rate. We also have some special centers that have made the list, and also a couple charter schools that we're working with that are on the list. So this is our universal group. Then going into the targeted, and remember the targeted, they get a little bit more work, and they had to have all yeses in grades 3 through 5. So for example, Coquina had 46%, 42%, and 43%. They needed more than 50% on each of those to not be on the targeted list. So these schools get additional support and additional attention from the state as far as the literacy leadership team. But again, we have that great relationship already, so it is work that we're already doing, and it just helps provide us additional support and additional hands on the classroom when we go. So the next group is our intensive designation. We have the 4 schools. The one school that was not on our other list but now has added was Cambridge, because Cambridge came out there right at 46, 42, and 43%. So this is our intensive designation. They get monthly meetings. It is a campus meeting. The literacy coach is actively involved weekly with the Coaches Academy, which is what Tamara Thatcher does. They have virtual check-ins with Tamara Thatcher, our state regional literacy coach. And then she comes into our buildings and does literacy walks, meets and debriefs with the teachers. They do collaborative planning. So those schedules are planned out, and they're either quarterly walks, or some of them she's adding monthly. But that is what the RAISE program looks like and is actively going on in our schools right now. So although it looked like a little bit much at first, it's really good work. And so I appreciate the additional support that we're getting from the DOE to improve our literacy in our schools. As I talked about the K-12 reading plan, I wanted you to have a moment to look at what the formula is. And this is the formula. So there's 6 components. There used to be 5. When I first remember, there was 5. Dr. Thetty's laughing, there were 5. They've added oral language development because we know how very important that oral language development is. And so there are 4 types of assessments. And then there are Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 instruction. And you've heard that a lot. But let's talk about core. Because you hear Dr. Sullivan and I talk about core mission and core class and the 90-minute reading block and core instruction. This is what core is. And I put the state definition of what core Tier 1 is. It's standard aligned, includes accommodations for students with a disability, students with an IEP, students that are English language learners, provides print-rich, explicit, and systematic scaffold and differentiated instruction, builds background and content knowledge, incorporates writing in response to reading, and incorporates the principles of universal design for learning. That's a lot, right? That's a lot in a 90-minute reading block, right? But let's talk about this. It's standard aligned. So that means, hey, it's grade level, right? It's on grade level. It's differentiated, but it doesn't say small group below grade level, does it? So that core 90 minutes is on grade level work. So then we go into tier 2, which is intervention, and tier 3, which is more intense. Tier 2 and tier 3 are beyond the 90 minutes. So sometimes we think of, if we walk in a classroom and we see all these small groups, that they're differentiated at different grade level work. But in the 90-minute reading block, it is on grade level standard aligned instruction. And that is key to core instruction. One of the great things about our benchmark advanced is the instruction is laid out just like this. So a teacher can look straight in the TE and it will, this is core. This is our 90-minute reading block. Then when you go and do your small group interventions, this is what tier 2 would look like. This is what tier 3 will look like. So all of this helps guide the school improvement process. All of this helps guide where we should be going with instruction. As I said earlier, our school improvement process, the website, I've shared this with you before. This website, Janet Stevenson just does an amazing job keeping this up. On the November 16th board meeting, you will have the school improvement plans posted for information and then posted for approval in December. The plans, the drafts are out there now. They're still finalizing them. And as I said, the schools that had to incorporate the RAISE standards, those have already been uploaded and the state has provided feedback if needed. I'm going to stop right there for a moment before we go into the elementary academic recovery plans.
Ms. Campbell?
Thank you. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So I don't know if you can you go back to the slide that had the descriptions of the targeted intensive, or you don't have to go back necessarily, but you may have said this, but would you?
Are you talking about RAISE?
RAISE, yes. Between the targeted, so universal is they have one grade level that was below the 50%, and targeted they have to have all three. So what was the difference then for the intensive? What was additional?
It's the level of performance.
Was going to be, is there a set number there, or is it?
I believe it was below 40, but I will have to double check.
So they had to have at least one. I'm just glancing, it looks like they all have. No, there's Cambridge is all in the 40s.
Yes.
So, okay. And then the next slide where you had the Florida's Formula for Success part, that is for all of our schools. That's not just a RAISE program.
That is our K-12 reading plan. This is the state guidelines as part of that.
Okay.
Because I thought it's been a while since we've talked about the K-12 reading plan, and it's an annual report that we write, and it's cross-divisional, and it really and truly guides the work. And so tying this into what core instruction should look like, the definition that guides our work. But this is our state guideline for the K-12 reading, one component. It's an intense document.
Right, and this, at first I had the question, is this only elementary schools? But then we look at the data, this is just for an elementary school, just an elementary school initiative.
What, that Raise
Right.
is just elementary.
Right,
It
and
is-
really just through fifth.
It is just through fifth, and right now it says third, fourth, and fifth. However, with the new progress monitoring, there will be a part for K and
Okay.
up.
Is there additional funding attached to any of this, along with the additional requirements?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, just
So funny.
had to ask. Just to comment to the board, I wonder with all of the angst and division over Common Core in the past, I just wonder why they would use that particular word with all the connotations that comes along with it. Clearly, and just be very clear, it doesn't have anything to do with Common Core. It has to do with, what the amount of time that we're on grade level, so I just wish they'd picked something else that means the same thing.
As long as I can remember, it's been called core instruction.
Okay, good. So
Tier
not to
one-
be confused with a previous controversial
No.
curriculum.
Tier 1 instruction, which is our core instructional model.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Ms. McDougall?
First, I want to thank you for Friday afternoon, when you helped me understand some of this, so thank you very much as you wanted to walk out the
Dr.
door.
Sullivan
So
and I
thank
are
you very
always
much.
here.
So I'm looking at my intensive schools here, and I have 3 out of the 4. So I know that some of them are priority schools. Now, will our priority school list change now?
No, they're all on there in some shape
Or form? Okay, thanks.
So to follow up on Ms. Campbell's question about funding to some extent, I noticed that we are supporting multiple charter schools, and we are supporting multiple contract schools. Are they paying us for providing that additional support in their schools?
We're not providing that support. The state is offering support for the charter schools. We just have to monitor that.
Okay. So we are monitoring their student data on all these measures as well, or?
Yes, that is part of our statutory requirements for charter, is
Okay.
we have to monitor. There are 2 components of charter that could get a charter into question, and that is financial and student performance.
Okay, so we're not investing any resources
No,
into.
we're not doing the walks. We're not doing any of that. We're just monitoring their performance.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Oh, as a follow-up, you have Fieldston, Imagine and Imagel on both the intensive and the targeted. Is that just a typo, or are they on both?
I think that's a typo.
Okay, so do you know which one is which? Or wait, were they supposed to be on the intensive or the targeted?
The targeted.
Targeted, okay.
My typist behind me said, that's fine.
That's okay. It's a lot of information.
Well, we did take it down from 80 slides to 60.
We thank you.
But if you want to go ahead and send us the other 20 just for our knowledge, for those of us who are a little data anal.
Yeah, we changed,
Got it.
all right, you ready to look at what we're doing in elementary? Wow, what a year. But I have to start by celebrating. I'm going to start by celebrating.
Yay.
I want you to look at these 10 schools who showed significant gains. And I have an asterisk beside Mims Elementary, because Mims Elementary is a priority school. They're still in that category. But look at the gains, because Mims Elementary is not a D performing school. They raised themselves to a C performance. And so all of these take note, but I have a special heart in Mims, because if you recall, we were without a principal, we put an interim, we did all the stuff to make it happen, and magic happened, and the teachers make the magic happen. I also want to take special note to Vieira Elementary. Out of 600 points, They outperformed any school in this area. 566 points out of 600. They outperformed all the charters, all the others. They were #1 performance for Bear Elementary. So we have to stop and take great note at that. First year of operation and that kind of performance. So,
Ms. Klein, I don't know if you're going to mention another point of celebration, but you look like you're going to go to the next slide. I'm going to pause you for a second.
go ahead.
Columbia Elementary School. You remember a couple years ago, they were a D school and in turnaround status with the state, and they raised their grade to a B, increased 45 more points, and were 2 points from being an A school.
Oh, wow.
So focused work, focused attention, follow through works, and we commend, well, at the time, Ms. Roberts, who happens to now be a director up here, but the work of all of these schools, and that's not to suggest our other leaders, every school has challenges and situations they've got to tackle, and no one school is the same, and if there's anything we've ever learned, there's no silver bullet other than focused intent on grade level, standards-based instruction with quality text, and and amazing teachers in front of our kids. So teachers are #1, school leadership is #2, and we're under the right leadership, we're heading in the right direction. So thank you, Ms. Klein. I had to do a shout out to our other high-performing school.
Yeah, so this is room to celebrate, and we have to take the time. Although we didn't, as Dr. Sullivan said, we did not opt into school grade. Our schools did extremely admirable work, and we have to recognize that. And Sierra Elementary, when I looked at it, I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, I knew they were going to do well with the leadership. They were going to do well, but to make 566 out of 600, it was huge. So now I'm going to walk you into our analysis. So these are our 13 schools that would have been a D. And as you can see, there are schools on this list that have never, ever been on this type of list. And to say that they were shocked was an understatement. So what my team did is we came together, and I think Dr. Mullins walked down to my conference room the day that the whiteboards were just craziness, because we looked at everything. These are some of the components we looked at. The other components, we looked at the learning environment, the school culture, the teacher readiness to teach, their experience level. We looked at, was it something that I need to call my friend Sue and say, hey, Sue, we need a paint job real fast, or we need this, or was it that we need to do more to support the teachers? Were the teachers not feeling like they belonged, or they were loved and supported? So did we have to do some fun activities? Did I happen to call some principals and said, hey, you need to have Monday Munchies, or whatever it is, because your teachers need to feel valued. So we looked at all of those components when we made this list of when we're going to walk. So we looked at, is it a core? Is it core? Is it the 90-minute reading block that needs support? Or is it intervention? Is it ELA? Is it math? Or is it science? Now, if you look at science, all these schools are on the list. But I have some good news. Last year, we piloted PENDA Science with some Title I schools. The schools that we piloted are not on this list because their science scores went up. One of those examples is Mims Elementary. So PENDA Science It's similar to an Iready type concept. It's teaching, it's assessing, it's progress monitoring, it's reteaching, it's some hands-on. So we're very fortunate to be working with Penda Science using some ESSER dollars to purchase that. So we're hopeful with science, but core. So for example, we looked at Atlantis. They were 9 points away from a C, 100 points away from a B. But their area that we need to assist them with is in intervention. So it's not their core instruction. It's what they're doing to accelerate and intervene with their students. Another school would that needed more would be, for example, Palm Bay Elementary. They have concerns in several cells. How are we going to support them? So as we dug deep, we brought the principals in and met with them and talked with them about the supports we're going to give them. Are we going to walk your building quarterly, or are we walking your building monthly? Today, there was a walk at Mila this morning. There was a walk at Palm Bay this morning. The beauty of this, it is cross-divisional. I have some directors in student service and in HR that are helping walk, helping to look at intervention, helping to give principals strategies to support their teachers. We have content specialists and resource teachers who are going in providing additional support. So also to the priority schools, we provided through ESSER dollars additional teachers for student intervention. Unfortunately, most of these interventionists are now in the classroom because we had too many vacancies in a classroom. And if you don't have a quality teacher in front of the students that are in the classroom, then we have greater concern. So that we have, they had the allocation, they had hired the people. Now, unfortunately, most of them are back in a classroom until we can hire 50 or so teachers. Instructional coaches and training them on the coaching cycle. What does the coaching cycle look like? And as I said earlier, Tamara Thatcher is leading that work and helping us with that. Additional academic support funds. And I believe that money is going out today. Then we have an additional primary literacy coach at 2 of the targeted schools, and then 2 12-month assistant principals that are working in clusters to help mainly with the behaviors and interventions that are needed to put structures in place in those schools. So when I talked about core, what does that core look like? So my team broke it down. Is it collaborative planning? Is it time stamping? Is it text preview? Are we planning? How are we using Iready? And then the schools are underneath that need that support. Intervention. What's your backup plan when you don't have someone to do the intervention? What are the skills that you need? Who are the people? What is the program? How much time are you giving? Is it using that time after core? Is it using it before school? What is your acceleration plan? Because we can't just intervene out of quality instruction. We have to provide the interventions and the acceleration along with quality tier 1 instruction. And then how are you monitoring? Do you have systems in place to monitor the instruction? Are you, as the instructional leader in the building, walking into classrooms and seeing not just that they have small groups going on, but what are they doing in the small group? And how are you supporting that teacher with the materials, the time, the planning, and the support. Because if our teachers aren't supported, then they can't get it done. So we have to support our teachers in getting that. And you can see the schools that we're working on in that area. In math, if they have a math coach, or that math coach is not already in the classroom, what kind of training are we giving that math coach? Are we pacing and practicing the implementation of the math standards? Are we monitoring math instruction, or are we only monitoring ELA instruction? You saw where our math is. We have to monitor math instruction. And then, how are we making sure that we're following through with the prerequisite skills? Are they learning? What is our intervention block? What does our intervention block look like for math? And you can see the schools that are getting that targeted support. And then science. So as I said, we're using every single person, Title I, ELA, math. We actually have a couple resource teachers that aren't even in the resource job that are willing to help us and walk classrooms and give support along the way. So this is this targeted focus for science. I wanted to also share with you a document. We created this document, well, principals created the first rendition of this 2 years ago. And we looked at how are we monitoring instruction? What are we looking for? Are we making certain that teachers understand the expectations of the grade level standards? Are they engaged in the quality instructional material? You all have heard Dr. Sullivan and I say over and over again, quality instructional material in the hands of our students, in the hands of our teachers. We are very lucky this year to have that quality material. Although Benchmarks has things that we're working through, and we continue to go through the pacing, and we're adjusting as we go. We know it's quality instructional material. We just need our teachers to hang in with us so we can time stamp it, and we can determine what changes we need to make for next year. Although we're making changes as we speak. You've met Jennifer and Patty, and Jennifer Cockrell and Patty Henning. They're working crazy to get the material right and supporting our teachers. But what are the things that we have to make sure we're putting in place? What we don't want to happen is our teachers to give up on the material and use something that's not aligned or is at a lower level, so our students aren't doing the thinking and the work. We want our students to be engaged in the work. So this document, as I said, 2 years ago, our principals came up with the original. Then we went back last year and the same team came together, and it helps our principals, guiding them through the steps of instructional agreements. They shared it with their staff, and it's just something to help us guide the work. The other thing that I want to share with you is the Director's Focus Guide. I think most of you remember when we did a Principal's Focus document, and the principals loved that. This is what I should be looking for in June. This is what I should be looking for in July. So we were like, wait a minute, we have lots of directors. So this summer, our connection with Bureau of School Improvement, and you know I love that relationship, they said, hey, we'll help you, Brevard. And for 2 days, they came. We set up rooms over here. Secondary, elementary, student services directors came together and created these documents. So when a director, I think Human Resources, I believe Mike Alba was in on that too. Mike is like our partner in all this stuff. we created what we should be looking for in September, what we should be looking for in October. All these are on a Google Doc, and as we see changes, we go in and we make modifications. But it gives a focused look of what we should be doing. Like in September, we were looking at the school improvement. We were looking at how we were helping our schools with that early warning system data, the MTSS process, because we know that the MTSS process is critical in helping our students be successful. So these are all just the look-fors. This is a quick sample. If you want to see more, just come see me. Dr. Sullivan and I are always here. And we'll be glad to sit down and show it to you. And it is great. And I'm thrilled that because of this work and because of the connected to the Bureau of School Improvement, we have the Bureau of School Improvement also working in Madison and Astronaut. And so they're in that whole feeder chain now, helping us guide the work, helping us see what we might have missed. And it is a service they're providing for us. Again, we're not a turnaround district. We're not a required district, but they're doing it because it's the right work. And we have that relationship with them. The green, the school support meetings, this is what our content specialists and resource teachers have done for the priority schools. So they have these scheduled meetings, and if they're scheduled, for example, Michelle Farrow is working at our science resource teacher for elementary. She's working in all of these schools. So this is a sample of, she's meeting with Endeavor at 8 o'clock till 9 o'clock, talking about how she can support them in science. Or if Patty Henning is working with a school with ELA, so they have this schedule, and it's sent to the schools. This is the schedule. It's a collaborative. It is a Google Doc, so they can add when they're available, when they're not. And it's that collaborative work back and forth to make a difference for student achievement, because that is our goal. My goal for this year is not to have the same results, so we had to do things differently. We had to provide a more structured supports for our schools and for our teachers. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Iready. You've seen these charts before. You'll see that interesting in reading, there's not a big shift from where we were last year and where we are this year. Okay, that brings me great stress because we saw this last year and then we have the results. So what do we have to do more? They're not bad results. I mean, it's not bad, but what do we have to use this tool for its purpose? And that is progress monitoring. We can't wait till we get the FSA to see where our students are performing. We are currently right now in a study with Iready for comparability to where our FSA and their final end of the year results are. So we joined in that study because we want to know, is it truly reliable? You know, the last study showed it was. The standards have shifted, so let's see if we're still as reliable as it was. So as you can see, vocabulary, we're showing a little bit of growth there, but that is still a key component, but that comes also from reading. The more we read, the more we learn. So our vocabulary development. This is without kindergarten because of their window. So we don't test our kindergartners the minute they walk in the door. We give them some time. And then the next slide is our math performance. Again, our math performance is not, as you can see, we took a little lower. We have work to do in math. We're very fortunate. We're almost finished with the instructional material process of reviewing all the instructional material for math. It's going very well, but we're hopeful to get a quality material that our teachers can utilize, and our academic performance in math will increase. So that is all I have. What questions do you have for me?
Questions for Ms. Klein? Katie?
I just have two really quick. One on slide 38. Let me get back there. All this targeted support, all these items are things that we're using ESSER dollars for, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then what does LPQ stand for?
Lowest performing criteria.
Performing. Okay. Is it quartile? I found some. I'm Googling it, and I'm like, I don't think this relates to education. But it's lowest performing. Okay. Thank you. So many.
Oh, we do it to ourselves.
So much code, and I don't think in the last 3 years I'd heard that one yet. So thank you.
Anybody else? I just have one quick one, and I think I know the answer to this, but on the Iready, at this point, we have all schools, right, utilizing Iready, and all schools have access to the teacher toolbox where they can align their results with support to address deficiencies.
Yes. Yes.
So here's the tough question. Do we have any idea what the use is on that?
Yes.
We do.
Oh, yes. I have access to all the usage. I can look down to every teacher and see how many minutes they're on and how many minutes their students might have rushed through. It has a rush mark. It has a performance mark. I can pull at any time, any school, any teacher, any classroom, and look at where they are using the diagnostic, where they're using the teacher toolbox, where they're pulling additional resources. And the resources are, I brought an example, because they're just amazing. That it's right there at your fingertips that you can use to teach. And it groups your students for you by skill set. So if going to whip this out because tools for instruction for understanding character, okay? Step by step. Then how to guide, how to check for understanding, and then the little mini assessment. And that is this was second grade. So for every skill, every component, it's all there for them.
So are we seeing pretty good use of the teacher toolbox materials?
We are.
Okay.
We are. And if you notice on the both on the instructional agreements and on the director's focus document, it says monitoring Iready progress, and that's what it means, is looking at that. All the directors can see their schools, and I can see every school down to every teacher.
Awesome, thank you.
And I love to play on that.
I bet.
Quite fun.
Anybody else have questions for Ms. Klein before we transition to secondary?
Can I just make one point?
Yeah, Ms. McDougall.
So first, this is absolutely amazing, which I said earlier, but we use MTSS. Now, I know what that means. Could we just tell our viewing audience what MTSS means, just to refresh their memory?
Multi-tiered systems of support. And that is just that. What tiers of support are we providing our students?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, hello.
Hi.
I'd like to take an opportunity to add to that question about MTSS. It's a universal concept, whether the student's challenge is academic, perhaps a reading deficit, or behavioral. Maybe there's some challenges in conduct, could be used in an attendance situation. So regardless of the difficulty the student is experiencing, it would be our hope that once those concerns are observed, the school engages in MTSS process and then targets interventions specific to that struggle and then continues to monitor it. So although we are talking about academics today, it's a very important part of supporting the students across the board in different areas. So I'm excited to talk to you about our academic recovery plan for secondary. And before I get into our priority schools, I want to bring the board back to some previous discussions we've had around the opportunity myth. Most of you were on the board when we went through the research, analyzed it. I don't believe in, being capricious with expectations with our teachers. I like to really stick to research-based foundational work. And I thought it was a great opportunity to bring us back to it. So for our Tier 1 support in all students, rereading the research, this quote just stood out to me, that when students who started the year behind grade level had access to stronger instruction, they closed gaps within their peers by 6 months. In classrooms with more grade-appropriate assignments, those gaps closed by more than 7 months. This enormous study showed that, in fact, the struggling student gains even more from on-grade level instruction than the student who may have been previously on grade level. Acceleration, that core instruction, it works, and we know it. So it's a really good time to refocus our schools around these basics. The 4 things: consistent opportunities to work on grade-appropriate assignments. Are the assignments really challenging the students and putting the mental capacity and struggle in the hands of the child, as opposed to just the teacher? A lot of times we have teachers working really, really hard. I want to see our students at least matching the level of work from our teachers and would prefer them exceeding them. Strong instruction, where students do most of the thinking in a lesson. Reference to what I just said. Deep engagement. So we're looking for high-quality curriculum. We're looking for effective instructional practices and student engagement materials. When we walk into a classroom, I know it's difficult for the teacher, because that's discomfort for everybody, but we're truly looking at the children, what they are doing, what they're grappling with, what they are producing. And if a teacher is doing that from a relaxed posture, that's wonderful, right? They've created an environment for that to succeed. So we're really looking at what the children are doing. And the single statistically relevant, most important factor in student achievement, particularly for our students who are struggling at the beginning of the year, is teachers who hold high expectations for students and they believe they can meet those grade level standards. Pleased to say we have an incredible fleet of teachers, and I'm really certain that our kids are going to benefit from this factor because it has a lot of power and impact. So looking at our priority schools, and I know there's a lot of numbers here, but I wanted to have it available at your fingertips. This is comparing school grade data for 2 years. And you will notice on the left that Astronaut and McNair are not bolded. And that's because although they have been priority schools of ours, they did not realize declines that would have lowered their grades. They held their ground, if you will. And I want to pay particular note to McNair Magnet Middle School. They literally held their ground. As you can see, 53% of total possible points in 2019 and 53% of total possible points in 2021. So when you consider all the losses in the district that you previously noted, them holding ground is quite notable. And as you can see, they are 1 point away from a B. And so we continue to provide them some additional support and resources, but they're no longer sort of in the center of our improvement plan. The other 6 schools, Poco, Johnson, Madison, Palm Bay, Southwest, and Stone, are where we're doing our most intense work. Because those are schools that would have been scored a B if that data, would have scored a D if that data had been graded. And so we're really appreciative of the state to have the opportunity of this year for recovery. Those schools simultaneously face additional challenges, and it must be said, right? These are schools teeming with incredible educators, great administrators, really passionate parents, and full of people who care about student achievement. But they also face disproportionate vacancies, substitute shortages, impacts from transportation shortages. So when buses are an hour late, or any of those struggles that we're facing. Students with trauma-related behaviors and just behaviors from what society has been through in the past year. The Delta variant at the beginning of the year, none of us were ready for it. I'll be clear and honest about that. The impact to those schools was even more pervasive. As you know, we were at a point with Madison at having to close the school for a couple days, but those impacts also hit those other schools disproportionately, particularly when they had like these great plans and ideas and hopes and dreams for what was going to happen during the school year. Really hurt motivation a lot as well. In high school, we're facing a lot of challenges from student workforce issues. In 2020 and 2021, many of our older kids entered the workforce for a couple of different reasons. One, to help their families out, and two, really the need for some of that workforce in places like Walmart or Publix that were still serving critical needs. Pulling those kids out of the workforce is really difficult. So we're looking at different models to complement it. We've had more requests than usual for students with work waivers and are really trying to recover some of those students that we lost. And so many intangibles facing our schools on top of really trying to help students prioritize their learning. And so again, pretty easy to see the areas to focus on. Each school's area of need is slightly different. So we're going to talk about how we developed an action plan from this point on primarily for those 6 schools. And so first and foremost was coordinated planning. Our directors set up meetings with the principals and school leadership teams. Those school leadership teams included faculty, instructional coaches, and additional other personnel at the school. District staff participated, and we used some of that state level guidance that Ms. Klein mentioned from the Bureau of School Improvement. We've also given each of those schools a buddy from my division. And a buddy has proved very helpful. So my 6 core directors, as you can imagine, were intently involved in this work. I took every other person in any leadership capacity in my division and assigned them to a school. So for example, Shireen Lupton, our STEM coordinator, is a buddy to Madison. Danielle McKinnon is a buddy to Southwest. Rachel Rutledge is a buddy to Palm Bay. Each person in my division is dedicated to helping these schools. So in fact, Lori Reinhardt, our great TOA, she's a buddy to Johnson, and she goes there regularly to cover for administrators so they can walk in classroom. She helped place a furniture order for them. Like whatever it is, the buddy helps out so that the administrator can spend more time on the important work. As Jane mentioned, through ESSER, we provided some additional resources to our priority schools. In our secondary schools, we targeted a student services staff member. So in some cases, it was a school counselor. In other cases, it was a social worker, or a TOA may have been the right fit. We just wanted to get the right person to help deal with some of those intangible issues at the school that was getting in the way of student success. We also have instructional coaches at all 6 of those schools now. Combination of federal programs allow that to happen. And an incredible new educator on my team, Vilma Wheeler, who used to teach at Vieira High School, was super happy to steal her. She is leading those instructional coaches in doing really high quality work on site. We've given additional academic support funds as well, and a full adoption of intensive reading instructional materials. And that's worth highlighting because we haven't had that for like 15 years. And so we're really excited to have a full adoption of materials for intensive reading. I also want to applaud, Dr. Mullins and the rest of Cabinet. We have been relentless on prioritizing protecting time for school administration, solving problems. Sue Han has met with these principals, solved facilities needs. Like my colleagues understand all the things that get in the way, And when it's a priority school, they are quick to respond. I just met with the priority schools the other day. They gave me a list of needs. Cabinet took care of them right away, trying to eliminate barriers to their success and help wherever we can. So really appreciate and want to mention that. So as a result of that initial meeting, each school created their own transformational plan. So this is an example from Stone Middle School. So I want to thank our friends at Stone. I think I asked her if I could share it. I'm not entirely sure. But if you saw the whole thing, you would see math, English, you would see science, social studies. You would see all the other subject areas as well. But I wanted you to see the kinds of things they wrote. So the teams themselves at each school created their individualized plan. And an example of how to use that, you'll see to the right. So remember when I mentioned you'd see an example of a Performance Matters report? This is an example of one that a teacher's might look like this, or a school, and you literally can add column after column after column. And if you see the blue arrow, I'll point out why it's really important to do this kind of analysis. So this student here just had a level 1 with a low performance on ELA, but what do you see before that? You see greens, you see level 3s. So the solution for this child is going to be very different than a solution for a child that has a history of struggling with basic things like phonics. So we don't want to over-solution something. This may be a solution around motivation. This would be one that I'd have a guidance counselor check in. Maybe they were ill that day, right? And of course, last year was crazy. So we want to make sure we're looking at all of those factors when we're prescribing solutions for individual students. And we don't lump this student in the same category as a student who has maybe historically struggled with ELA. So again, this was just a snapshot from the plans created by Stone to look at different aspects as they're working with their individual students. And again, you would see this with any of those 6 schools. So then each school also produced their own walkthrough tool. And I know it seems kind of counterproductive to have them do their own, but we thought it was really important to do alongside their teachers, alongside their priorities. So as you can see here on the one for Stone, you see Wicker at the bottom. That tells you it's an AVID school, and they're focusing on some of those AVID strategies. So this is a form they created that they were going to use in their walkthroughs to make sure their goals were being met based on their data and their plan. Over to the right, I'm just sharing with you what is our district tracking of the support at the schools. And I really commend Lori, Molly, and Lena for this work. They get all the credit. So if you look at that calendar, you'll see some gray and you'll see some colors. So we are basically tracking all of the intervention work being done. When you see a color, that means a member of my staff is going to be there. So for example, on Monday the 18th, you see Civic Skills Day, you see math walks and social studies walk. That yellow is telling you that we're prioritizing our team to be there. Because I only have one math, one English, one science, one social studies. So we realized rather quickly that we had to create a schedule to make sure they were being maximized. And then other things are for awareness and to help keep the school on track. I know what it's like to work in a priority school. It's really easy to be overwhelmed and stay off focus. So we're working alongside to keep them focused. So this is done throughout the year. It's been in place since the beginning of the year and helps coordinate my staff with school staff in doing the critical work. It also allows me to pop in those opportunities when I can also. And so, as I mentioned, we had a full and complete reading adoption, which is very exciting, and that included progress monitoring. And so for this year, we did not have to further contract a separate progress monitoring tool. So this is all first-year data. And so in the fall, we tested all students 7th through 10th grade. So we use Read 180 for curriculum for intensive reading, but we also use it for the progress monitoring of all relative students. So 7th through 10th, and then the students who are juniors and seniors who have not yet passed their testing requirement were also progress monitored. And these are the results in big bucket categories of where our students fell. And it's rather synonymous with the data we have. So there were no big surprises there. We were able to look at it, of course, more discreetly by grade level. And the gaps in 7th grade were surprising. They were actually our better results. So kudos to Jane Klein. But as you can see, more students below grade level than we'd like to see. The proficiency level of our 7th graders a little higher than 8th, 9th, and 10th. But our concerns, of course, with our 10th graders, considering that's the year they passed the assessment test. Read 180 works in Lexile, so that's like a blast from the past probably for some of you guys. We also disaggregated the data for you by our main ethnic groups. I'll let you take a look at that data as well. And that's looking at the percentage of students in the proficiency levels. I would like to point out for 11th and 12th grade, we only tested students who had not passed the reading assessment. That's why you see a disparate score there. Moving on, since Read 180 was new to our district, I wanted just to share a couple of the features. It is a complete and comprehensive program, and students are placed into different levels of the program based on their assessment and are receiving intuitive, customized instruction. It is based on a rotation, so there are components for whole group learning, small group rotation, and independent as well. And so our schools manage it a little differently. Sometimes the entire class goes through rotation. Sometimes, particularly if there's an instructional assistant and the room is large enough, you'll see 3 setups. I want to mention that it is a computer-based program, and in partnering with educational technology using ESSER funds, we bought new laptop carts for every single intensive reading teacher. To make sure that the technology was not a barrier, either by being old or having to fight and borrow and share. And so the student is placed on 2 primary tracks. And so I wanted to just show you their dashboard. Where you see Gustavo the Great, that's the dashboard of a student that stays in the Read 180 platform. And you can see the various areas that they will click on through. The reading passages are interesting. And I've talked to a lot of students. I've been going around to all the schools. I've been to probably more than half of our intensive reading classrooms, and the kids seem to really like it and are interested in it. If a student scores below a certain level, they're receiving what we call Tier 3 instruction, and you've heard a little bit about that from Mrs. Klein. And the program has partnered with System 44, which is providing even more support. So you'll see that panel to the right. So if a student is not quite able to work in the Read 180 platform, the System 44 platform is a complement. It's all part of one package, so we didn't have to buy separate resources. On to math progress monitoring. We've continued to use the NWEA MAP testing this year. We are in math adoption. And so it has been my hopes and dreams that what we adopt has a progress monitoring tool. But the state, of course, is also looking at a progress monitoring tool. So TBA on the future, but for right now, this data is really useful for us. So the main score that you'll see is a RIT score, and that is in statistical terms, it's a RASH unit. And what it does is it looks at the maximum difficulty that the student has success with. It really is a growth measure. And so if you take a look by grade level at the different courses, you can see, for example, in algebra, our 7th graders had a stronger RIT score, meaning they were more successful with the more difficult content. And so, this gives us a good starting point of where to work with the student. When you move beyond that, here's an example of a class report. So the teacher is getting information right down to the specific skills on the growth area for their students. And so, for example, in this class right here, you can see where the students were in functions and modeling. I keep mentioning statistics as an area and the basic algebraic scores. This is an individual student profile. So it goes further on to identify the specific skills for the individual student. So these are snapshots of the reports they get. For example, on this student, it is telling the teacher and the student reinforcing inequalities would help them reach their goals. So it really is a growth measure and allows teachers and parents and students to really understand how to help students build the skills that they need. And it is online and interactive for the child. Any questions about any of that before I go on to college and career readiness?
So Read 180 is progress monitoring for all students, right?
It is
In those grades.
It is a curriculum for intensive reading and progress monitoring for all students,
whole
7 through 10.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. That was my question for the patient there. And then is that data available to parents? Like, is it uploaded to Focus, or would it just be something if they had parent-teacher conference they'd use, like they would use Iready data?
I think yes. The student should be able to log on to their Read 180 from home for a parent to be able to view it. I'm not 100. I'm at like 90. So I'll add that on my list of follow-ups.
Okay. But it's not necessarily on Focus, but if your student logs in, they can show you, most likely.
Correct. I feel pretty strongly in the most likely, but I would want to give an exact answer.
So now that we have this progress monitoring, and I know we've kind of dabbled different progress monitoring and reading before, like we have Reading Plus.
We've been using Reading Plus.
Right.
The
Sounds like this
previous
is
years.
maybe more comprehensive, would you say?
They're both really good, actually. We liked Reading Plus as well. Reading Plus was not as comprehensive as a course curriculum.
Okay.
So Read 180 offers more to the everyday course. Both were pretty strong platforms. This just gave more for overall instruction.
Okay. And then.
And this was the one state adopted this year.
Okay. That's
Important.
good, because if we end up going to the progress, we're hopefully already using the one that the state might pick. Who knows? Then do we use this progress monitoring to determine who's going to be in an intensive language arts class? Are we still using FSA?
Yeah, we actually use all of it. So
Okay.
the schools get a matrix that puts together all of the information, and we look at preponderance of information. So by and large, all of our students who scored level 1 are primarily in reading. With our level 2 students, we look at all those factors. We look at the student schedule. So for example, sometimes we have a 10th grader who's a level 2, but had previously been level 3s, and they're in AP World Language, AP Language and AP World History. They're getting a lot of reading instruction. And so we look at that combination of factors. There's their strength of schedule, provide the volume of content and similar skills that we feel comfortable recommending a waiver. And of course, a parent can recommend a waiver. But we're going to look at history. We're going to look at the other factors. Sometimes the student had a really low FSA, and then they scored really high. And they're like, oh, yeah, I didn't feel like doing it that day. And everything else we're going to pull the student out of that. Somebody still has to monitor them. So their English teacher becomes their monitoring point, and they're still tested.
Appreciate that. We do that because one of my frustrations over the ILA course has been that it does pull kids often out of, they lose an elective for it.
Yeah.
And for good reason, but at the same time, sometimes it pulls them out of classes that they're motivational for them.
Absolutely. We just look at, are they text heavy? Are they receiving similar level knowledge? Social studies is a great complement for ELA and ILA. And so if a student is in a class where they're doing a lot of that similar type of reading, we're much more open to waiving that.
Thank you.
I have a question for you on math. And you and I had talked about this a while back. It's my understanding that there is a report that can be generated from MAP that scores could then be plugged into Khan Academy for personalized learning opportunities. Do you know, did we ever figure that out? Do you know?
Yeah, unfortunately, it was not as easy as I thought.
Okay.
But I do think we can do it this year. And so I will follow up on to make sure we're doing that export. It might have to wait till next year only because we're in that student system transition. And until I ask all those questions that Russell Cheatham has trained me to ask, I have to make sure that data can be exported. I'm relatively optimistic, but I'm not 100%.
Okay. And do you know, are we intentionally, I know on the Read 180, you're fairly certain that students can log in and pull up the information for parents. On the MAP testing, is that, are those student reports being sent home? Is that something that kids can log into from home? Like if I wanted to?
They cannot. It is a secure test site.
Okay.
But we can make sure those go home, generate the student reports.
Okay.
It's kind of like FSA, where it's a secure test site going in. So it's not easily transparent right now to the student login at home.
Okay. How labor intensive is it to generate those reports?
Not at all. It's important.
Okay.
It's essential.
Okay.
We want students to own their data. That's an important part of academic recovery, is for students to feel connected to their data, for parents to feel connected to that same data. We began this school year without a math resource teacher. So Ms. Bowman was doing that on top of other things. So our new math content specialist has been on board for like 2 weeks and thrown into adoption. So I will connect with her and make sure we prioritize that information getting sent home. I think it's super important. It's a step, no matter how intensive it is critical to improvement.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I'm going to move on. Just want to give you guys a quick update on our College and Career Readiness Initiative.
I have been waiting this whole time, excited for this moment.
I'm so excited about this. It's one of the best things we've done on my watch, in my opinion. And I really need to credit Molly Vega for her tenacity in it. So if you guys remember, maybe 2 years ago, when I did one of the clearinghouse updates, one of the things we noted that our last clearinghouse data had suggested only 46% of our kids enrolled in any post-secondary institution, which includes most trade schools, which includes Eastern Florida. It was a really shocking number. However, if a student completed even one dual enrollment course, their enrollment was at 70%. So I took this information and met with the Vice President of Eastern Florida, Dr. Fletcher. He replaced Dr. Miedema, and I've loved working with him. He's a yes guy. I go to him with ideas, and he's a yes person, which I love. And I told him that the previous year I had started a conversation with Dr. Miedema about opening up on-campus dual enrollment for marginal students to have a connection to Eastern Florida. And he said yes. And so last year in the spring, we got a yes, and we moved mountains to implement this year. We didn't want to wait. We didn't want to study it. We wanted to get it in our schools this year. So we contacted every principal, and we asked them to identify that right teacher that works magic with students who may not traditionally be successful and genuinely believes in the promise of those kids. And our teachers delivered. Our schools delivered. They handpicked a crew of teachers. We worked alongside Eastern Florida. Eastern Florida came in and trained the teachers completely in the curriculum. We had to certify them as eligible for Eastern Florida teaching as well. And this has become probably our greatest success story. So you can see our first semester numbers there, and I have a feeling they're just going to go up and up and up. And at school, on site, we brought down the GPA requirement for a 2.5. And so we targeted students who had not yet been given other college acceleration opportunities. Students who were not in IAP, who were not in IB, who were not in dual enrollment. and enrolled them in this course this first semester. We just made it happen. We just sort of got it done. And as you can see, 381 kids strong. And you'll see the course description. Each of these students are getting college credit, but more importantly, they're getting connected. Mike Cador at Eastern Florida has been in and out of all these classrooms. Myron Campbell, one of our great connects. Just when they visited the classrooms and brought them like the fancy backpacks, not the string ones, this week they're doing field trips this week and next week to the colleges. In there, they all save their letter of acceptance because they had to actually apply to the college in order to be in the course. And they'll be doing FAFSA with it and their actual application for post-secondary. So this first semester was seniors only who had not yet connected. And it's amazing. Nobody, I hate to say it because I wish it weren't true, but it's true, nobody had previously treated these students with the potential that they're being treated with now, to have those intense conversations. It's literally like goosebump worthy. Really great things are happening. And kids that have never been in a pipeline are now in a pipeline. So I have to credit, like I said, Molly Vega and the Eastern Florida team that we just pushed and they took the push and we got it done. So our paradigm will be for second semester to also include some juniors. Continue to prioritize maybe seniors that didn't have the opportunity first semester, but also look at some juniors that might help them create options. So they're doing field trips, they're doing career programming, just a lot of wonderful things are happening and they're all getting college credit, which is amazing. And so we will realize this impact in another year on our college and career readiness indicator because we looked at those kids that weren't getting that level of support and we've now given it to them. So I'm really, really excited and proud and hopefully you guys are too.
Awesome.
Yes.
Nice.
Yay. One last slide, and so this is completely off topic, but Dr. Mullins asked me to bring this to this discussion. So Commissioner Corcoran sponsors an African American History Task Force, and you can see some of the information there on the slide. And as part of the task force, they have initiated exemplary school district status as a recognition program for districts that have exemplary programs on African American history. And, you know, there were some districts before us, but as you guys know, we usually participate rather robustly in the state recognition programs. But the first step is direction from the board. And so before we engaged in the process of potentially looking at exemplary school district status, we wanted to share some preliminary information with the board and to seek board direction if you'd like us to pursue this avenue.
Why wouldn't we?
I don't think we wouldn't.
So you don't even have to worry. Let's get board direction and roll.
Let's get it done.
Well, I have to check that box on the form, so of course I wanted to do it officially.
I am making the strong recommendation we pursue this with great vigor and excitement.
I strongly support your recommendation.
Let's do it. Yep,
All right,
second.
perfect. That's all we needed.
All in favor?
We first thought it was Dr. Mullins' direction only, and he had already provided direction. And then we went to submit it, and there was a little box I had to check on board direction. And so, oh, I got to get this in front of the board. So I appreciate that. We will certainly then initiate the process. I know that it includes a partnership with several of the state universities. And so we will give Dr. McKinnon a strong move forward in support of the commissioner's program. So thank you for that. And so any other questions?
Mr. Susan, nothing?
I'll just be quiet. I mean, we've been going at it long enough. I had a bunch, but I was like, you know what? Let's just.
We said it was hearty. Remember the first comment? It was a hearty presentation.
Anybody else? All right, I think we're good. Thank you so much, Dr. Sullivan and Ms. Coyne. We appreciate all the work you guys do, and I would say especially with, you know, all of the challenges we continue to face, that you all remain laser focused on what's important.
And I know Jane and I both want to say thank you for a board that is engaged in the level of work at the level of which you guys operate. It's important, and so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Are we, can we take just a quick restroom break, Dr. Mullins, before we bring the next team on? Okay, so we're going to take just about 5 minutes to refresh, and we shall return. All right, we are back in session, and now we're going to hear from Assistant Superintendent of Facilities Services, Sue Han, on attendance boundary changes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have a very brief presentation today. But first I want to introduce, seriously, first I want to introduce a member of our team that you may not have met. This is Karen Black. She is our manager of planning and intergovernmental coordination, both of which she does very well. But you'll notice a distinct upgrade in the quality of my slides. Karen is 100% responsible for that. You recall every other presentation has been engineering world with no graphics, no nothing. So,
But there's no goat.
there's
Yeah.
no goats, yeah.
We got to work on that, though. Like, Karen, you got to feed some goats in there.
Karen and Dave are also our data folks and have done extensive analysis to lead me to be able to talk to you about these proposals. So I just wanted to express my appreciation for Dave and Karen, as well as our partners in Leading and Learning who have worked with us on all of this as well. So where we are in the process, we start a few months ago to kind of analyze where we might want to go, if anywhere, with our boundaries. And we collaborate with Leading and Learning. We talk to transportation. We look at our enrollment. And this year has been particularly, I've used the word wonky in terms of data and enrollment and where we're going. So, you know, we've waited a little bit to the last minute just to try to see where we might be going with our enrollment. So the numbers that you have in this presentation were updated as of the count on October 15th. So thank you, Karen, for doing that. So we're kind of at the end of our initial staff work, and we're at the beginning of the engage with the board and the community on these proposals part of the process. So as I said, we have a lot of unknowns, so it's a very difficult environment in which to make big decisions about things like boundaries. Things with COVID impacts. So we've got charter schools in the mix. The new scholarship parameters are affecting our enrollment. And then just the pace of planned growth in Brevard County is enormous. And where all that's going and how that might impact boundaries next year and boundaries 5 years from now, very difficult environment in which to make those types of decisions. So this is not a perfect science here at all, but we've got a few proposals that we think might warrant some consideration. So there's 4 on the table. Meadow Lane Primary, Meadow Lane Intermediate, going to Discovery affects about 3 students. That's basically an undeveloped area to try to get ahead of some major growth that will be in that area. Apollo Elementary to Imperial Elementary. This is a pilot project in a different way of doing redistricting. So we're looking at a proposal to kind of start thinking about it and making some administrative decisions today and actually doing the rezoning a year out. So it's a pilot project with that type of approach. Heritage to Bayside, both of those are in high growth areas. The Heritage area is a little bit ahead on the growth, so that's one that we think will be recommending to get ahead of the growth in the Palm Bay area. And then on Beachside, Delora and Satellite, moving students to Cocoa Beach, basically in the area of Patrick Space. I cannot say that, I'm sorry. In the area of Patrick, looking at that as a potential for doing a better job of servicing base families, but I have more to say on that as we get into the presentation. So the first one shows you the Meadow Lanes to Discovery Elementary. This is largely undeveloped property, but you can kind of see on the right side of the screen as to where the future development is happening, and there's quite a bit of it. And so we wanted to try to get ahead of that from a transportation perspective. It's easier to get to Discovery than it is to get across Interstate 95 and through the traffic on 192 over to the Meadow Lanes. These are this is the data regarding the number of students. Again, these were updated October 15th. And on the left side shows you some of the proposed growth in the area. And of course, growth is all on paper, and you don't really know whether it's coming until you see the building permit and the certificate of occupancy. So, it's an art to try to make sure that we are doing this ahead of the growth and is responsive to the growth, but not too far ahead. So we think this, like some of the ones we've done in the past, will be a good way to get ahead of the growth in that general area. This is a slide that just shows the demographics as they would be after the redistricting. In this case, it's a pretty small change with only 3 students. And then our plan for public engagement for this one is to just simply work with the affected families and recommend special consideration if there are any rising sixth graders. I don't believe there are at this time, but there could be between now and when we actually put this into effect. So the one in the North Brevard area is Apollo to Imperial Estates Elementary. There's 52 students affected, and this one is the different pilot project approach. So for school year 22-23, this area would remain zoned for Apollo, and we would ELO to Imperial Estates with no fee versus the standard $30 fee. So we would basically be encouraging families to consider moving ahead to Apollo or to Imperial Estates in school year 22-23. Transportation would stay the same, and I'll cover that on a separate slide. In school year 23-24, we would intend to implement the rezoning and give special consideration to rising sixth graders. One of the challenges with doing this sort of multi-year approach is we have to adjust our systems to be able to accommodate that, so that when a new child comes into this area next year, yes, they're zoned for Apollo, but yes, the folks in transportation, the folks at the school, registration, everyone can say, oh yes, but you will be going to Imperial Estates next year, so we would encourage you to ELO there this year. So we've got some work to do on our end, and certainly we have quite a bit of community engagement to do to talk through this. So with respect to transportation, in school year 22-23, busing would be to Apollo only, ELO to Imperial with no fee, and they would get there by walking or parent transport. In 23 and 24, that would switch to busing to Imperial only. The zone that we're rezoning is much closer to Imperial Estates, so that would create a lot more walkers, but it only reduces the number of bus riders. It does not reduce the number of buses. So it doesn't have a strong impact on transportation. And then those students who wanted to stay at Apollo would follow the standard ELO process of a $30 fee with no transportation. This is the data and analysis of the 52 students that would, and the school capacities relative to Apollo and Imperial with and without the change, as well as the transportation impacts. Keep in mind that this is 52 students that are affected today, whereas this is actually going to take place farther in the future, so the numbers obviously will be different when we're looking at this again next year. But we wanted to try this as a pilot project and introduce it to the community and see if we could do something that is a little more, a little less aggressive and a little more responsive to the community, and allow them to transition to the change with a little bit more time and a little bit more notice. So, and then this is the demographics post redistricting based on the 52 students that would move. Our public engagement plan, obviously, we'll do our standard work with the community. We have an attendance boundary change webpage ready to go. We're going to be doing similar to what we did previously when we had a big number of redistricting proposals where we had online surveys and those types of things. We intend to do a virtual community meeting. We'll be letting the local governments know about all of these proposals through our capital outlay committee, direct contact with our affected families, and of course working with Leading and Learning in the schools to be very targeted in our approach to make sure folks are aware of what we're thinking about. The special consideration recommendation would be no fee for ELO to Imperial in school year 22-23, and rising sixth graders would be granted special consideration for 23-24 at Apollo. So that's kind of the framework for that proposal. The next one is Heritage High to Bayside High School. This one has, as of October 15th, 197 students affected. When we first looked at this proposal about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago, it was 155 students affected. So the change just in the couple months has been pretty dramatic. So this area is growing most definitely. And this is not one of the undeveloped areas that is being developed. This is an area of platted lots in Palm Bay. So this is something that I think we're going to need to be very closely watching in the Palm Bay area for all of our schools as growth continues in that general area. This is the analysis of the number of students. You'll see the utilization rates at Heritage and Bayside. That did not come out right. At Heritage and Bayside, as well as some of the intended growth in the area on the left side of the screen. So there's many residential units going out in that area that we need to be thinking about how we're going to accommodate all of that growth. And right now we're just thinking about the high school side of this equation. There's some other sides of this equation that we need to be thinking about too, in terms of making sure we have elementary capacity in the Palm Bay area as it continues to grow. So here's the demographic slide. And again, with the public engagement plan, very similar. We'll work through the webpage, community meetings, letting the affected local governments know and affected families, and recommending special consideration to rising 11th and 12th graders. Also wanted to just make a point at the secondary level that any grade level can EPO back to their existing program, so that will not change. And then finally, we had proposed a boundary change for Delora and Satellite to move to Cocoa Beach Junior-Senior High School in the area of Patrick Space Force Base. And this better aligns with the elementary school boundaries. And so we thought we had some fairly solid reasons for proposing this redistricting. We have been working with the base. Karen's been working with the base liaison. We've gotten some feedback from them that I think I would generally describe as they're concerned about change for their families. And so they said they would prefer to not rezone this year, but I think we would like the opportunity to continue to work with the base liaison and work with the base, because they said they would be interested in talking with us further for something in the future. So I think there's no reason for us not to continue our dialogue with the base liaison and try to work through this. It may not be something that we recommend once we get into the actual redistricting, formal redistricting process, but I think as of right now, we'd like to continue to talk with the base liaison and get some additional feedback from them and their thoughts on how we can best accommodate their families. These are the demographics for each of the schools. And again, we would continue to work with the base liaison and do our standard attendance boundary change public engagement process for this one as well. And so our next steps in the process would be over the next about 6 weeks or so, we'll be standing up a pretty robust public engagement process. We'll do our final review with the in-house team with Leading and Learning and Transportation and prepare that for board action in December. You'll see this on your November 16th agenda as information, I would say more or less in the format it is in now, with maybe a little bit of updates on our conversation with the base. And then in December, you'll see the formal recommendation. In December, the board will set the public hearing date and also consider any special consideration recommendations so we can make sure to advertise those appropriately so people understand what those are before they engage in the public hearing process. And I believe that concludes my presentation.
Board members have questions or comments for Ms. Ham?
Latest presentation.
Yes.
Ms.
I do.
Campbell?
I've got a few questions. So I'm just going to kind of go down the list. For the Meadow Lanes to Discovery, you mentioned this with some other ones, but right now there are 3 students. And I know some of those projects they haven't laid like the infrastructure yet, but how much of a possibility is there that we're going to have a much greater number before the end of the school year, before we start the registration process? Or is it just that there's only 3 houses already built?
Dave, go ahead.
I would say a majority of this is the plan range.
Right, okay, so those 3 were previous. Okay. My next question is, in the past, at different times, we've needed to, each of us pick representatives for community committees. Are you still anticipating that we'll need to do that?
No, ma'am, we changed our procedure.
Okay.
So what we do is actually more targeted public engagement versus the committee process, because it got down to we were ranking things that it wasn't very suitable to rank them. The original process was designed to compare option A and option B, and we were just ranking option A. So we thought we'd do something a little bit better, so that procedure got changed.
No, I appreciate that, and I should have known the answer to that question. I forgot. The Heritage to Bayside, I think we talked about, you shared that with us before, and how it really makes sense because those families go to Southwest and those families go to Turner, so just make sure it makes sense that usually almost every student who goes Southwest ends up going to Bayside, or a significant portion of them. So that made sense. My question really is just about the balance of the numbers, and maybe this is a Dr. Sullivan, or actually maybe a Chris Moore question, but you know, when we talk about changing the sizes of our high schools, it has an effect on athletics and their divisions for competition. How likely is a shift of this size to make a significant change there?
So as you're aware, Heritage is a handful of kids away from Vieira and Mill High.
Yeah.
So they can lose their kids and still be in that same 1,800 plus. We would anticipate I don't want to say significant, but I'll use the word decent amount of kids still choosing to Heritage for the programs, because you know they all have pretty distinct programming. But as you mentioned, I actually get calls every year from parents in that block that believe they're districted to Bayside. So both schools are in a potential to experience growth. Bayside has held over 2,000 students in the past. They can add this comfortably and actually use some of their existing space. If that South Palm Bay development is realized sooner than we expect, we're going to have to really involve Palm Bay High in the discussion, but it's not as soon as you've been to Heritage when you just look outside the door.
Right.
The growth at Heritage is here now.
Right.
We have to relieve Heritage, and we have room at Bayside, and those families believe they're districted for Bayside.
Right. No, I'm not saying I don't think it's a bad idea, but that's going to be a part when we start talking to the community. If Bayside grows by 100 students and they get bumped into a higher division, you know, there's going to be some people who are concerned about that.
They've been up and down over the years, and so it's not going to be anomalous for the school.
Okay.
I think in a different area it might, but they were in those big numbers for a lot of years.
Right. Okay, and then my last question is about Satellite. I know that's one of our frozen schools, correct? I think we're frozen. So we don't, you know, assuming this doesn't happen, we don't really have a release for them. And even if it did happen, they're still pretty high capacity. So I guess I don't know, you know, are we still looking at other ways to kind of relieve some of the pressure, or are they fine with the capacity as far as, you know, facilities and all of that?
They're okay with their capacity. You know, our high schools tend to underutilize the numbers because of dual enrollment.
Right.
So we end up with not as tight as you might with elementary when they're not leaving part of the day. But one of our primary reasons for this recommendation is to provide some central Brevard relief. Right now, Rockledge, Vieira, and Satellite, trade kids, if you will, they're sort of in and out of those zones. Several of our Vieira Century families may choose Satellite because they were there for Delora, and there's no relief in that area, and so the recommendation also just gives us some release between those three, because the next impact would be O'Galley to free up some of that area, and O'Galley is growing, has having a bit of a growth spurt as well, and the Beachside to another strong beachside school. seems to be a smoother option, especially when it comes to improving services for our families, because those students do go to Roosevelt for elementary school.
Right.
And
It makes a lot of sense.
and we're looking ahead to some possible K-12 programming, STEM programming, particularly between Roosevelt and Cocoa Beach. Shireen Lupton's working on that. We've got a promise of a neat K-12 programming that we think would be great for those families as well.
That's all.
And this reduction in Delora, the other reduction that'll come is when we build the middle school in Vieira is going to also reduce it by, I think it's like 400 students. Is that about right for the size?
I don't expect that much, but Delora will also
Is it two? Okay.
inherently draw choice.
Yeah.
And so we believe that Sue said the exact same thing, so it's coming from a place of wisdom. We believe that Delora will continue to be a natural draw for families exercising ELOs. We've had to freeze them from ELOs in the past as well. So we think there's some natural attrition there from Johnson and from the other schools.
It's a great school.
They'll maintain a strong enrollment.
And did we decide on the, and I'm sorry I didn't send an email to you on this, but just out of curiosity, the construction at Vieira High School, the extra wing, did we get are we close to, where are we at with that?
Oh, yes.
We're real close.
We're very close.
Okay. 2 stories, 1 story, do we know what's going on?
It's sort of one that looks like two.
Okay.
We're building some special CTE programming spaces and chorus spaces. So those are large, high ceiling spaces.
Okay.
And also blast program spacing in there as well. But we've been working together extensively.
That will be covered in my report to the board on November 16th at the workshop.
I
So
got
we've
you.
got some big projects going on, and I intend to status on all of those. And
I
that
just
will be
know
included.
Vieira's busting at the seams, and it's not going to get any smaller, right? So
Right.
if we're planning out ahead is all. All right, thank you.
Anyone else before I go? Okay, so I know this is going to shock you, but I'd like to talk about the Apollo shift. And I just have a few questions on it. You know, the rest of them seem to be based on documented growth in the area. I didn't see any specific reference on concerns about growth in the area forcing the shift, I guess. So do you all have data that's not addressed here?
I'm going to let Jane cover that once she gets her mic on, but I think this one is more in service to students and families because the kids are much closer to Imperial Estates than they are to Apollo.
So when we look at the lines, it's Highway 50. And so it's the only little enclave that crosses Highway 50 to go to a school that's further away. So just as when we made the changes with Pinewood to Mims, it makes sense to me as we continue to look to make boundaries within the neighborhood. So to me, it's a neighborhood cleaning up an old boundary and giving parents the opportunity to have 2 years to kind of fit into this, because I think in all times when we do boundaries, it's a change and it's hard on families to adjust. Some are thrilled, but most really want some time. This gives parents and families time to learn about the school, to learn about the neighborhood, to give the opportunity to attend there with no ELO charges, and giving them that it's a younger population, time for adjustment. So that's my rationale behind bringing that forward, is to continue to clean up those little spaces, excuse me, along the way. And we have many more to come.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, this is just from memory, but aren't there some sections of this neighborhood south of 50 that are walking distance to Apollo and transportation is not provided?
No.
They're all over the 2 mile?
To Apollo?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So the one, and admittedly, I've not yet had a chance to go and drive the neighborhood, but the one concern that I have is looking at it on the map. It doesn't appear that, because it's like three or four neighborhoods in that.
Wow, 4, yes, it'd be 4.
Is it, because it's Cathedral, it's
That,
April?
and it's that, what's the one right? I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, but when I look at it on the map, it does not look like there's a way for students to get through those two neighborhoods without going out to 50 or 405.
I am not certain. I would believe it would be to 50, but I'm not certain.
It looks to me, and I would just want to make sure that we can double check that. It looks to me like there are waterways that would block passage from a large portion of this area that we're talking about moving to Imperial, which would theoretically lengthen their trip to Imperial significantly if they have to, depending on where they are in the neighborhood, to go out to 50, to go down to Barna, to go down, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So-
50 to Barna, Barna over to Meadow Ridge.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure that we take a look at that and make that there is, and maybe there's an opportunity for us to create some passage opportunity in there by working, with the city of Titusville or something. But in looking at it, when I looked at the map initially, like the map on my phone, and then I pulled it up on Google Earth, and I don't see any clear connection. It's almost like those neighborhoods were intentionally divided with waterway. So, and then the only other question that I have for you is, and I guess you probably have kind of answered it, is Apollo is currently at 86.7%. Do you foresee growth in that area that would prohibit families from ELOing back to Apollo in the second year? Like if they decided to stay at Apollo, one of the things that we claim is they could ELO to Apollo. Do we have numbers that would, growth numbers that would indicate that we're going to see a big enough boom that would close them out for ELO?
I don't think so, but that's a very good question, so we should double check that as well.
I don't think so as well. There's that one, neighborhood that's being built off of Knox McRae, not far from Apollo, and I know currently when we looked at that, we would not have capacity for that neighborhood, which was truly within a mile from, or less than a mile from Apollo at the current layout. But also one of the things that Sue and I have been in discussion with is the restraints we put on ourselves on when we freeze a school, and looking at that policy and how we could adjust that, because I think sometimes we harm ourselves with closing the door.
So one of the things I'm concerned about is pushing Imperial to 92.7% with the redistricting, but it sounds to me like you're saying that Apollo may end up, what are we doing with that new development?
There appears to be more growth around Apollo than there does around Imperial.
Okay.
Because also across from Fox Lake, that subdivision that's being built on 405, that one, they're just starting.
And
That
would be Apollo
area,
too.
yeah. So there's more construction around Apollo than there is around Imperial.
Okay. All right. So yeah, if we can just clarify that access, bike and walk access, that would be awesome.
If we're having to transport, instead of transporting across Highway 50, it would be, to me, make more sense to transport east on Highway 50 than crossing Highway 50. So if it is considered a hazardous walking condition, we would still maintain buses.
Got it. Okay. Super. Thank you. Anybody else have questions or comments? All right, thank you all for your work on this. We appreciate it. I know how difficult that is with all of the uncertainties that we're currently facing, but we appreciate you keeping an eye out and planning ahead for us. So thank you. All right, hearing no further business, this workshop is now adjourned.
Dr. Mullins, did you want to go?